Good evening. Inside your Dropbox, there's two documents. Really, the topic of conversation this evening is the state release of the report card. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight. So it's listed report card on the first document, and it should look just like this. And I apologize for the quality. We literally grabbed it as soon as it was available. It took us several times to download, so we had to take a screenshot and upload that. The interactive report card was only working right before we came to meet at 5 o'clock. So the information that I'd sent to you earlier in the week, I explained that that was the preliminary data. It had changed several times since July, but this is what has been reported to the public and what we're going to land on. So there's lots of good news here, actually, even though we see a couple letters we might not like. Does everybody have it? I can wait.
Go ahead.
What's it under?
It's actually the first listing in the attachment. It says report card.
Underneath the board agenda?
No, it's in your attachments on the board agenda.
So just real briefly, I'll go over the achievement are the assessments that we take, the end of course exams or the annual assessments. You know, they've undergone some changes. Now we call them the AIR assessments. That's the vendor that we use. We scored a C. C is the new A, if I can kind of replicate that. C is the new A.
Just call it an A.
Well, C represents it truly the expectation. The OD is set forth a standard of expectation, and C represents that standard of expectation. In addition, it also represents 1 year's worth of growth. So we're meeting that expectation in that area. They're gap closing, not an area that we're very proud of. We've got some work to do there, but we recognized last year that we had some work to do, so we had already put into place some planning for that. Co-Plan to Go Serve is an initiative that we're, or a defined instructional model that we're moving towards K-12. Mrs. Bio and I have been working very closely. Many of our teachers have gone to training over this model, and in summary, very brief model, an intervention specialist is paired with a general ed teacher, and you're going to actually see that tonight of what that looks like. And so you're bringing some instructional expertise with some content expertise. And those pairings, we believe, are going to be very helpful in trying to move our students forward. Also, that gap closing, just to refresh your memory, that actually is a reflection of what they call annual measurable objectives, where we look at our subgroups of population. It kind of came out of No Child Left Behind years ago, so we take a look at students who are identified in certain groups, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, ethnicity breakdowns, male, female, those kinds of things. We feel strongly about looking at all of our students and not breaking them down into those subgroups. K-3 literacy, that's new. We saw a glimpse of it last year, but this year is really where we're noticing some of the difference. And again, we recognize that we have some work to do there. But that measure, that report card measure actually is triggered by the first 30 days that kindergartners come to us. If you recall, we've talked about that kindergartners readiness assessment, that KRA, and we administer that and all of the diagnostics K-3 in the first 30 days of school, and we submit those scores to the state. So if we have students who come to us, kindergarten, and they are not on track, they are flagged. And so we watch those students very closely, and then we measure their progress as first graders. And we want to make sure that they're meeting those growth targets as first graders. I'd like to remind you that when they come to us in kindergarten, we don't have control over their education prior to them coming in. And that first 30-day test, that readiness assessment that they take for us, is what starts that K-3 measure on the report card. The progress is you'll hear us talk about that term and coin in fluctuation with value added. So you'll hear us interchange those terms, and that literally is measuring a year's worth of growth. So the 7th grader going in as an 8th grader, how well did they do year to year? And again, we want them to measure at a C is what the expectation is. We got to be, and we did some really, really great jobs with our students with disabilities. You can see we scored an A there. So if you want to think of that in terms of years, that's like scoring 2 years worth of growth in lieu of 1 year expectation of that C. Our graduation rate, we're doing a great job at the high school getting our kids in and out of here on time. 4 years, we're graduating them. And we have a few of our students who take that little bit of extra time, but for the most part, the high school's doing a great job getting them graduated in that 4 years. And the Prepared for Success is another new measure. That's the high school measure. When our students are graduating, are they graduating with remediation-free coursework needed at the higher ed level? Are they graduating with certifications? Are they graduating with advanced placement coursework? Those kinds of things. So there's a lot of good news buried here, even though a couple letters you see are a little bit unnerving. You know, so questions?
Oh, lots of them. But
Oh,
I'll save most of them for another meeting.
okay.
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 My main one, I'm just having a hard time wrapping my mind around how the gap closing can be an F and progress can be a B.
That's a great question. So if you look at progress as measuring the student's progress year to year, so fall to fall or spring to spring, versus the gap closing, which is measuring that student's progress at that point in time. So it's a snapshot, which is the gap closing, versus the value added or the progress, which is a measure over time.
And the gap closing, correct me if I'm wrong, is also compared to a state.
A state number, like a benchmark number.
It's picked, selected.
Okay.
That number actually has fluctuated. We've seen a lot of fluctuation. So if you recall several years ago, the No Child Left Behind target was 100%, 100%. Well, then they backed off of that and said 100% of our students are going to score a passing rate, which was 80. And then they stair-stepped us to that point in time, and they wanted that 80% benchmark. Well, we switched assessments and switched vendors, and so that number changed, and now we've seen another number, the target, change again, and actually we're anticipating that it's going to change yet again. So that target is literally a moving target.
Okay, but if your gap closing is an F, and let's say it stays low, progress, both progress and graduation rates should come down also. Because just because it's a snapshot in time, that there's a whole series of snapshots in time that make up the progress.
There's a mathematical formula that they use to calculate both, that is both unpublished and
Top secret, that's very complicated.
unavailable. There's been lots of people who have asked for that, you know, more broad explanation with the mathematical proof. And I don't know if anybody, if you do, help me, but I don't know if anybody who's been able to get their hands on that.
I think the big thing, Jim, is the one measure measures kids on their own from year to year to year. That gap
the
piece
progress.
is always a number set by the state. So it's not really looking at the individual kids,
Right.
looking at that group, and you compare it to a number that unfortunately has been going up. And even though we're making good progress with our kids from year to year to year, when we look at that measure, we're not even close.
Will the technology that we've added help with the gap closing?
Well, what we'd like to say it is actually going to level the playing field. So especially here at the high school, for our students who have not been able to maximize, you know, to reach that full potential. The other piece to that is the high school will receive a value added rating for the first time this year. That value added rating will be one snapshot in time, and that's a whole course that I could, you know, walk you through. In fact, we're going to go to another training in December, but that piece, the value added is actually a measure of over 3 years. So they calculate those averages over, they call it that trend data. The high school does not have that trend data yet, and they won't until next year.
So this B component is for 8th grade and below.
No, it's actually, that value added is measured from grades 4 through 8. up until this year, and it would be 4 through 10, including this year. Our fourth graders are the first ones who receive a value add, because remember, that value add is measuring point in time to another point in time, so spring to spring. So how they do on the spring test in third grade compared to how they do in the spring test in fourth grade. And then from the fourth graders are measured as fifth graders.
I got a question on that K-3 literacy.
Yeah.
We're not getting out of here tonight.
Yeah.
We'll have a special seminar about that.
So you're measuring this, the first 30 days these kindergartners are in class.
That's legislation.
September 30th is the deadline.
It's the
Kids
deadline. We have to
gotta be tested by
report
then.
it to the state by September 30th.
They don't come till the 10th?
And actually,
Well,
we're
that X number of
completed
days left.
testing them by usually the 20th, because we have to gather all that information and sort it and then submit it.
How do we compare to our neighbors?
Well, those numbers are still coming in. Like I said, we literally pulled this off, but it appears that our K-3 literacy data actually is looking a little bit better than some of our data, than some of our neighbors. But please don't hold me to that until we get a really broad snapshot of
This
the
Chelsea's
county.
newspaper article tomorrow will answer that question, because that's what she's more
Pressure's on.
Yeah.
What's that?
Pressure's on.
Nope. That's right.
Well, not to put the horse in front of the carriage here, but this goes with your argument, the administration's argument about not starting after Labor Day, starting before, which we're going to be talking about that in a few months again. So that's going to be an interesting data point to
The state's
talk
actually
about.
tabling that now, if you haven't heard. The state's trying to make it so nobody starts before Labor Day.
Well, that's not the state, that's a piece of legislation.
You mean after
That's out.
Labor Day?
After Labor Day, I'm sorry, yeah. So I would assume that data collection time would back off as well.
I would not assume that at all, no. That piece of legislation is being run by the Cedar Points, the Kings Island, those people. That's really, it's just that group of people that are behind that. Been there before. so.
One final question.
Sure.
For now. So I guess ultimately what we should be, we shouldn't get too worked up about the F and the gap closing, because that's really kind of something taken out of context of a student's academic year.
My professional opinion.
Right, so as long as we're seeing the good progress and the good graduation rate, that kind of trumps.
Those are the things that I believe, as a district, those are the pieces that we value. I don't think we take a strong value at looking at students demographically. I think we take a strong value at looking at our students in their entirety, in their entire K-12 experience. I think those other pieces reflect that. Again, just my professional opinion.
Mr. Scott's ready.
Yeah.
Graduation rate.
Yes.
The 94.1 of students graduate in 5 years. Is that 94% of the ones that didn't graduate at 4 years?
That's a good question, and I have to research that, because there's been some question about that. I'll have to get back to you about that. Like, if that's calculated into the 4-year or just the 94% of the students that didn't graduate in total. I need to research that a little bit.
I think it starts in their 9th grade as a cohort, and those 9th graders are flagged. And then in that 4 years, that group of kiddos are what turns into that number. So when they were freshmen, X number of kids, when they're graduated in 12 years, they look at the number that graduated, and that's where that percent comes from.
The only reason I ask is because the 5-year number is lower than the 4-year. So I'm hoping that they're just,
Of the ones that
look, and
didn't.
if so, then that means we're,
That didn't make it.
That would-
Well, I had a couple more things, if I could take just a couple more minutes of your time, if we're